Hello and welcome to another episode of Latitude. I'm Maruf Raza. Although Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh was in the US to address the UN General Assembly, the key focus of his trip to the US was his meeting with America's President Barack Obama. Even though there has been considerable media interest and speculation about his proposed meeting with his Pakistani counterpart Nawaz Sharif, which will now take place under the shadow of a major terror attack near Jammu. And later in the show, in a reminder of the 26/11 attacks on Mumbai, an affiliate terror group of the Al-Qaeda held a mall under siege for 4 days, killing about 60 people, injuring many more in Kenya's capital of Nairobi. The terror group says this is an act of revenge against the Kenyan army's actions in Somalia. Our guests this week are Chidanand Rajghatta of the Times of India, who has been following the Prime Minister on his trip to the United States and has been extensively reporting on the Prime Minister's visit and has written on Indo-US relations in the past. Also, Mr. Rajghatta will be joining us from Washington, D.C. And to discuss the events in Nairobi, we will be joined by Mr. Ray Locker, the enterprise editor of USA Today, who has been writing and commenting on military intelligence and terrorism-related issues from across the world. Ray Locker will be also joining us from Washington, D.C. While the focus of Dr. Manmohan Singh's visit to the US was to re-energize Indo-US relations, the terror attacks in Jammu seem to have drawn the attention of even President Barack Obama. But Dr. Singh insisted that he will go ahead with his meeting with his Pakistani counterpart Nawaz Sharif despite the attacks.
The burst of fire was
First strike terror and then talk. Pakistan has done it again. Major Fedayeen attacks by Pakistan militants on Thursday in Hiranagar and Samba sector of Jammu left 10 dead, of which 4 were cops, 4 army men, including 1 lieutenant colonel and 2 civilians. This even as Prime Minister Manmohan Singh landed in the United States. He will be meeting his Pakistani counterpart on the 29th in New York. No assurance from Pakistan, no forward movement on terror, but both sides determined to talk.
State-sponsored cross-border terrorism is of particular concern to India, also on account of the fact that the epicenter of terrorism in our region is located in our neighborhood in Pakistan. There can be no tolerance for state sheltering, arming, training or financing terrorists, nor can they absolve themselves of the responsibility to prevent their territories from being used to launch acts of terrorism.
India has been repeatedly saying that these attacks can't take place without support from the Pakistan army, but Pakistan remains to be in denial.
Any activity that takes place anywhere has some sort of an institutional role of Pakistan in that. I think by saying this, by using this narrative, actually one would be strengthening the hands of those whom you want to defeat.
Even as tensions escalate, India looks at the US to rein in Pakistan, which was the top focus of talks between Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and President Obama.
India would like the United States to mount pressure on Pakistan when it comes to combating extremism. But Obama's invite to Nawaz in October is also a sign that the US needs Pakistan as much on these issues, especially also with the drawdown of troops in Afghanistan over the next 5 years, over and above the outgoing Indian Prime Minister. And even as terror and the latest attacks stop the talks here between Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and President Obama, India and the US also had a lot to discuss on other fronts, including trade and investment.
While terror was the focus, both India and the United States have a lot of things on their plate, which needed numerous levels of talks and discussions. The last one being Foreign Minister Salman Khurshid meeting his counterpart Secretary Kerry. The discussions focused on defense deals, economic cooperation, energy and climate, but most importantly, the civil nuclear deal and the liability concerns.
The world's two largest democracies, countries that have for a very long time been invested in the peace and prosperity of their own people, that there is a natural convergence between the United States and India.
Even as the whole gamut of engagements is clearly spelt out, US realizes that Manmohan Singh's government has its limitations. The big question being, with the US having many more important things lined up, how much support can India expect? Is the Manmohan-Nawaz meet all about optics? Will there be any substance to the talks, or will it be yet another exercise in futility and a desperate attempt by a government that has lost ground back home? Before the UPA faces elections, this could be Manmohan's last-ditch effort to show some achievement on the foreign policy front.
Joining us from Washington, D.C. is Chidanand Rajghatta of the Times of India, who has been following the Indian Prime Minister on his trip to the US. Chidanand, my first question to you is, will the offer of certain new concessions by New Delhi to Washington, particularly for nuclear trade and commerce and defense contracts, be good enough to re-energize Indo-US relations, or has the Obama administration lost its enthusiasm for India?
Well, Maruf, the US-India relationship is not a one-item thing or a one-time thing. It's not something which depends on one big leap. Over the last few years, we have understood that after the nuclear deal, it's an incremental process. Every meeting, every engagement adds a little more. It becomes bigger, broader, deeper, wider. So yes, what the advancement in this nuclear deal will do this time is push it along a little further, remove some more doubts, some more wrinkles. We are told that Westinghouse and NPCIL will conclude some kind of early works agreement, or at least iron out some of the wrinkles that have held this up. But there's still a long way to go, and like I said, this is a work in progress. US-India relationship is a work in progress. There was a White House official who briefed us a couple of days ago, who actually said they're looking at the US is looking at the relationship with India over the next century. So there's plenty of time to go, and I guess this will move it along. It will certainly move it along. It'll help, and not just that. There are issues of trade. There are issues of visa, and these are perpetual issues. These are two countries which are democracies. They're lively democracies. There's a lot of lobbying, pull, push. It's not a sort of client, relationship or master-client relationship. This is a relationship of not equal powers, but fairly engaged powers, which will, agree, disagree, scrap, fight, but will eventually move things along. So the short answer is yes, the nuclear agreement moves along a little more.
One area of strategic cooperation between India and the US would perhaps be on the high seas. But how do you see India and the US cooperating to contain China's growing influence in Asia?
For the longest time, we used to talk about, the Indian interest in high seas, going from, the Straits of Malacca to the Hormuz Straits and so on. For that expression seems to have dropped off the radar, but I think it's very much alive, and I think there's a greater degree of cooperation between US Navy and the Indian Navy than we actually see in public. If you notice, by the way, there's a lot of the piracy issue has again dropped off the radar, because I think there's a fair degree of advanced cooperation between the two countries. And now, of course, the whole incident in Kenya actually brings, the Somali issue up front again. But the point here is, I think there's regular military-to-military dialogue going on, including, in the naval sphere. I don't know if both countries want to publicly talk about containing China. But yeah, sure as hell, they're going to collaborate quietly, have more exercises, more exchanges. The Indians haven't bought a whole lot of naval stuff from the United States. A lot of it is on the Air Force side, in terms of large the Hercules C-130 transport, and now they're talking of Chinooks and Apache helicopters. But there's a lot of potential on the naval side. Some purchases were made a few years before, but I think there's a lot more potential. And there's also, cooperation in terms of patrolling, in terms of joint exercises, which they've been conducting. But specifically about containing China, I don't think it's an expression that either country wants to use very much in public. At the end of the day, I think the United States buys into India's contention that it needs a bigger, better Navy, and it has ambitions going back to the 80s of a blue water Navy. If you remember, Rajiv Gandhi, during his prime ministership, that was when the term blue water Navy for India became very fashionable. Dropped off the radar for a while, but I think there's a quiet execution in this sphere.
For India, the litmus test of Washington's sincerity towards India would be how America would go around taming Pakistan and getting Pakistan to dismantle its anti-Indian terror machinery now and not after 2014. And do you think this is a realistic Indian expectation?
Maruf, Pakistan is a complicated question for the United States. They, for the longest time, have had a different, reading of Pakistan than we do. Their way of handling Pakistan is to try and, sort of coax Pakistan out of its steep dive into fundamentalism, into extremism. Also buy their, literally pay Pakistan to get out of it. And one gets the feeling now that they realize that it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. So the last sort of couple of years, there's been a hardening of attitudes in this town towards Pakistan, and that's very evident in the kind of punitive drone strikes which have gone on relentlessly despite Pakistan yelling and screaming about it. And also there is not as much military cooperation. You don't hear of too many weapons being sold or too much aid. They keep some stuff going through the Kerry-Lugar Act. But by and large, I think the US has realized that they're not going to be able to buy their way out of it. There's an attempt now again to invite Nawaz, right when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh landed, just hours before that, the White House put out an invitation to Nawaz Sharif asking him to come to Washington on October 23. So I think they are also, both countries, India and US, I think are getting onto the same page now insofar as Pakistan is concerned, that somehow they need to be literally sort of coaxed out of this, their steep dive into extremism. And insofar as terrorism is concerned, there are frequent expressions of support to India, commiseration, including President Obama said this morning about the Jammu and Kashmir, the latest incident in Jammu and Kashmir. But you're right, in terms of actual ground level cooperation between intelligence agencies, doesn't seem to be happening very well. There are wrinkles there. I put it down personally to bureaucracies and different styles of functioning. But at the higher level, I think there is a will that the two sides should work together to get Pakistan out of this incredibly self-destructive path.
Thank you, Chidaran, for those insightful answers. It is not just the US that is keen to raise Indo-US relations to the next level, but even Dr. Manmohan Singh has shown very clearly that he is willing to go the extra mile. Welcome back. In a major act of terror in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, an Al-Qaeda-inspired group held a busy mall under siege for 4 days, killed 60 people and injured many others. But more importantly, raised questions about their operations and their act, especially so as it comes very close on the heels of a statement allegedly made by Al-Qaeda's chief Ayman al-Zawahiri, where he has instructed Al-Qaeda's followers not to kill innocents, women and children.
Even as the death toll of this horrific attack in Nairobi's Westgate Mall is still being ascertained, the Somalian Al-Qaeda affiliate group Al-Shabaab has claimed responsibility and called the cold-blooded murder of dozens of innocent civilians an act of justice. in what was Kenya's worst terrorist attack since the bombing of the US Embassy in 1998, nearly 70 people were killed and 175 injured in a bloody 4-day siege.
They shall not get away with their despicable.
We shall not relent on the war on terror. We will continue that fight, and we urge all people of goodwill throughout the world to join us.
Even as global leaders have come together in support of Kenya, an Interpol global warrant has been issued against the infamous White Widow, Samantha Lewithwaite, who is said to be behind the attack. She is the wife of 2005 London bomber Jermaine Lindsay.
This is the threat of Al-Shabaab to the region and to the world at large. We send our condolences to the Kenyan government and the Kenyan people, and I'm going to visit Kenya to share with the grievances with the Kenyan people.
We stand with them against this terrible outrage that's occurred. We will provide them with whatever law enforcement support that is necessary.
For India, it is almost like a grim reminder of the 26/11 Mumbai attacks of 2008. Similarities are uncanny. In Nairobi, as in Mumbai, the target was an upscale area. More than 10 terrorists entered the mall in Nairobi from multiple entries, opened fire and took shoppers as hostages. Very similar to the 10 Pakistani terrorists who entered a hotel and laid siege for days till the terrorists in both cases were neutered. And not to forget that Kenya does have a huge Indian population, resulting in many Indians being amongst the victims. 6 Indians, including 3 from Gujarat, were killed, and nearly 20 children from Gujarati families were reported missing after the siege.
The Nairobi Mall under attack itself was built by a Kutchi construction firm, and roughly half the business in it held by Gujaratis. It's only natural that after Kenyan nationals, maximum loss of life has been suffered by the Indian state.
The carnage in Nairobi once again showed the enduring ability of Al-Qaeda and its affiliates to wreak terror. The question is the Al-Qaeda leadership itself in control of its affiliates? When claiming responsibility, Al-Shabaab said the attack was retribution for the Kenyan military's operations in Somalia. But the indiscriminate killing of innocent civilians, including women and children, defies the latest set of guidelines issued by the Al-Qaeda. Just last week, Al-Qaeda chief Ayman al-Zawahiri had issued new guidelines for his cadres, specific do's and don'ts for jihad, which urged his fighters to leave alone non-Muslims living in Islamic lands, respect women and children, and to refrain from targeting enemies in mosques, markets and gatherings. But with the loosely organized network of cells and affiliate organizations, and with each of them operating independently, the Kenya terror attack has shown that the new Al-Qaeda chief may have little or no control over its affiliate organizations.
The events in Kenya are of particular interest to us in India, as a large number of Indians live and operate out of that country, and unfortunately a number of Indians were caught up in this latest terror attack in Nairobi. And to look at issues related to Kenya, terrorism and Africa, we have with us Mr. Ray Locker of USA Today, who is a keen observer of military intelligence and terrorist-related issues around the world. Mr. Locker, in Africa, Kenya has regularly faced terror attacks in the past decade or so. Why is that the case?
Well, part of it has to do with its neighbors. Somalia to the east has a long history of Islamic radicalism, primarily with Al-Shabaab, and that spills over into Kenya. Also, we saw with Osama bin Laden, and there were people who were working in Kenya as well as neighboring Tanzania in 1998. And all that just has to do with the neighborhood Kenya's in.
Could we say that terror groups that are inspired by Al-Qaeda, such as the Al-Shabaab, which is now seeming to become quite popular and powerful in Africa, or the Lashkar-e-Toiba that operates out of Pakistan, have become bigger and more powerful than the Al-Qaeda itself? And is the United States expected to focus on them and not just on the Al-Qaeda in future?
Well, I think you do see a U.S. focus on groups like al-Shabaab and Lashkar-e-Taiba. It's not necessarily as high profile as with al-Qaeda. Certainly no one is doing as big of a manhunt for people at al-Shabaab like they did for Osama bin Laden, but that activity is constant. We've seen a greater involvement in U.S. Special Forces troops throughout Africa doing various anti-terrorism activities. They've used Special Forces C-130 gunships to attack targets in Somalia. So that activity is ongoing and obviously probably heightened now that in the aftermath of the Nairobi attack.
There is a view among some observers that the recent attack in Nairobi seemed to have a lot of similarity with the 26/11 attacks on Mumbai. Or is it just that large public places will continue to be easy target for terrorists across the world?
Well, I think any public place like the Westgate Mall is an easier target, but when I first saw the footage from Nairobi, I immediately thought of the Mumbai attacks for precisely that reason. They were attacking a soft target, some place where people would go and not expecting to be the victims of terrorism, a high-end shopping mall in Nairobi, luxury hotels in Mumbai. People go there not expecting to be attacked by terrorists, and I think given the relative success of what happened in Nairobi would probably make it more likely we'll see that in the future in other places.
Well, thank you, Mr. Locker. It's quite clear that groups like al-Shabaab and various others inspired by al-Qaeda are now perhaps much more lethal and more dangerous than the al-Qaeda itself. And equally importantly, a lesson from Nairobi once again is that public places will always be easy terrorist targets. That's all in this episode of Latitude. Thank you for watching, and we'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, goodbye.